All right. Well, we are starting today a series called Not Okay. It's a look at mental health issues. These are problems that strike so many people. We'll look at it in just a moment. As we get to that, I want to say, as I do each week, a big hello to those who are joining us in West Lafayette at our campus there at Burnett Creek Elementary School. Also, want to say hello to those that are joining us online. Each week that we meet, there are hundreds of people who are joining us in different ways who aren't in this room. Would you help me to welcome those people today to our service? Now, as I get started today, you may notice that my voice doesn't sound good. It sounds, if you know my voice, you know my voice today sounds sick. But don't worry, I'm not sick. I'm not going to make you sick. I was very sick. I suppose sicker than I've been in years. But for right now, I get this really cool voice. Makes me sound cool. And, that's kind of a good segue into our subject today. Because, when I was really sick, like a week, 10 days ago, and I'm certain helpless and pathetic to look at, and I couldn't even hardly get out of bed or do anything. I hadn't been that sick in years, and as I was sick like that, no one looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you?" No one looked at me and said, "Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Why don't you fix your problem? Why don't you pray about that? Why don't you just praise the Lord?" Nobody said that to me. That would have been a ridiculous response to my virus. But when it comes to mental health and mental illness, often that's the way that many people in our culture, and particularly in the church, respond. We end up saying to people, "Hey, why don't you just pray more? Why don't you just memorize some scriptures? Why don't you just believe more? And these problems will go away." And the truth is, there are a whole lot of people going through situations where they're not okay. And I want for us over the next 3 weeks to explore this. This week, we'll be looking at gaining some perspective on mental illness. Next week, I'll talk about how you might, if you're going through an issue like this, how you might address this in your life. And third, and how the Bible helps you to address that. Third, the last week, I'm going to talk about how you as a family member or someone who loves someone who's experiencing mental health problems can respond and reach out to them with the love of God. But today I want to talk about some perspective as it relates to mental illness. The Bible depicts a wide range of human experience, including people who are profoundly sorrowful. Job, the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah. These are three books in the Old Testament that are some of the saddest literature that I know of, that are written about depression, anxiety, fear. I would say that the book of Job it's like 40 chapters of depression expression. But it doesn't stop there. There are many characters of the Bible that are touched by these issues, whether it's rage they can't control, or it's fear and anxiety, or it's depression, or it's some other manifestation of a mental health issue. There are many characters in the Bible where this is addressed. But we see it also in the person of Jesus. Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, was so overwhelmed with sorrow and stress that he said these words in Matthew 26:38, I am overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. The Bible records that Jesus was so overcome with sorrow and stress that the Bible says great drops of blood fell from his forehead. Now, that's a medical condition that's related to when your blood pressure reaches a certain level. This is something that can happen. That's what was going on with Jesus. And so, when we speak of mental health or mental illness, what we're talking about is a situation where a person either consciously or subconsciously can't control their feelings, or where the negative emotion or imagination in them becomes dominant. Now, maybe you've never had a situation like that. Maybe you've always been thoroughly in control of your emotions. But I would bet that any self-reflective, self-honest person would say that's not always the case. Why am I talking about this? Because this is a wide-reaching problem in our modern world. I want to give you a definition. It's the definition that comes to us from the National Institutes of Health. And in fact, if you will Google, not now, write it down, but if you will Google NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, you can learn more about this. Plenty of good information on there from the federal government. But this is how they define any mental illness. Any mental illness is defined as a mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder. Any mental illness can vary in impact, ranging from impairment to mild, moderate, and even severe impairment. That is, individuals with serious mental illness. Now, that's just a very simple definition, but it's something that strikes millions of people in our society. And I would bet that we would be hard-pressed in this setting today to find anyone who's either not experienced these things in their own life or known someone in their family or their circle of friends who's had these kinds of problems. In fact, from the same source, the National Institute of Mental Health, we find these statistics. In 2017, there were an estimated 46.8 million adults aged 18 or older in the United States with any mental illness. This number represented 18.9% of all U.S. adults. That's a staggering figure. Now, there may be many reasons for this. I think there is a great debate going on about why this is. And some of them are probably good guesses. For instance, the permanent presence of technology in our lives cannot be good for our minds. The fact that our minds never rest from content and from seeing others and being seen in some way through the internet, it can't ultimately be good for us. But certainly that's not the only issue here. I'm certain other issues would be things like the breakdown of the family and the collapse of any moral order in our society. These things must lead to problems like this. Let's look at another statistic. The prevalence of any mental illness was higher among women than men. 22.3%, 15.1% of each suffering with some issue that's related here. I wonder if this isn't because women are more honest and more forthcoming about their issues. A third statistic I just wanted you to see: young adults aged 18 to 25 had the highest prevalence of any mental illness. Look at that, 25.8% of people aged 18 to 25 saying they've got some kind of mental illness. Friends, I'm pointing this out to you to say that I am very concerned about people. That's the reason why I think the Lord wanted me to talk about this subject during these weeks. But particularly, I am very concerned about young adults. Because to give some perspective, I've got a picture of myself when I was 18, black and white picture in my office. It's to remind me that there was a time when I had hair, and it had color. That was good. But I look at it from time to time just to remember what my life was like then. And I don't know if I knew a single person when I was 18 who was on medication because of anxiety or depression or an eating disorder or some other problem. But my children are in this age group, older boys. They know a lot of people with these issues. My guess is you do too. Any mental illness, when you compare the highest is among young adults, you compare that to adults ages 26 to 49, it only drops 3%, 3.5%. 22.2% of the public who's aged 26 to 49 is facing these things, and then it drops significantly, those aged 50 and older, to 13.8% are dealing with these problems. And so because the world is facing these kinds of problems, because this is the reality that we are facing in our own society, I felt that I had to address this. And I just want to start with what I think are healthy perspectives as it relates to mental illness. I will get to the scriptures, but I just want to lay these things down as foundational as we look at these issues. So some healthy perspective. First of all, mental issues happen to a person because we live in a broken world. Not because that person is weaker than others or deserves hardship more than others. Unfortunately, in the church, at times we have forgotten that what causes these problems is not actually, it may not have anything to do with the direct choices of the person who's afflicted by them. And so, just as we wouldn't blame someone who has the flu or has cancer for anything moral necessarily, we wouldn't want to do that with mental illness either. We would want to understand these things come from the fact that sin has broken our world. Sin has broken the human race. And God in some ways is our only and greatest hope. Second perspective, as we look at mental health, good mental health treatment should mirror the same medical approaches used for physical health. What do I mean by that? I mean that if your kidney was bothering you, you would go to a doctor. And if you are overwhelmed with depression to the point where you don't enjoy much of anything, you need to see a doctor. If anxiety has gotten you in such a hold that you are having panic attacks, you probably need to see a doctor. If there is an ongoing situation in your life of extreme stress, someone that you're close to is dying, you've experienced an unexpected transition in your life, like your job was lost, you find yourself experiencing some of the hardest things you've ever faced in life, it's a good idea to go see the doctor. That's what I'm saying here. A third perspective is that miraculous healing is available to people with both physical and mental needs. So, yes, I believe that God heals. God can heal anything. I've seen it in my own life. God has worked in my own life to heal me of learning disability, for example. That goes beyond a physical problem. He healed something in my mind. And I believe that God can heal anyone at any time from anything that ails them. However, I wouldn't, because I believe God heals, discourage anyone from taking a medical course to deal with problems like these. I wouldn't say to someone, well, because your problem isn't physical and it's in your mind, it's not real, and medicine has no help to you. I wouldn't say that. I would assume that medical approaches can be helpful. But it shouldn't be necessarily the first thing you turn to. But if this is an issue that's ongoing in your life, you eventually should look into it. Next and last, in terms of a perspective on mental health, the church must respond to any mental illness with God's approach to all brokenness: grace and mercy. You know, when it comes to people who are starving, we are a compassionate church. When it comes to people who've never heard the gospel, they don't have Bibles in their language, we as a church will give tens of thousands of dollars to that need. When it comes to people who are hurting in our own community, our church has a great heart of compassion. And I'm saying to you that even when it comes to these kinds of needs with mental illness, that we need to respond with the same heart of compassion for people. Rather than finding mental illness as a way that we could see a sign of somebody's spiritual weakness, or decide that this is an opportunity for us to judge someone else because of the way that they are afflicted in life, we must instead extend the love of God to those who are hurting and never compound their pain because of our own hang-ups. Sometimes the people who criticize mental health in others, or the lack of it, are the very people who've got some of the deepest challenges of their own that they've been refusing to face. Now, I mentioned to you that the Bible deals with this subject a lot. There's almost too much of the Bible to say everything the Bible has to say about this subject. But what we see in the Bible is that some of the very strongest figures in the Bible have the deepest wrestling matches with their own souls. The greatest figure in the Old Testament, the greatest prophet, the greatest leader, the most powerful individual of God we find in the Old Testament is found in the character of Elijah. Elijah works incredible miracles. He stands alone against a powerful king and queen who have led people into idolatry, and he risks his life numerous times to say what's true. And in fact, his signature miracle, the thing that people remember about Elijah if they don't remember anything else, is where he calls fire down from heaven. fire descends from heaven and it consumes this huge sacrifice that's been watered down. They're in the middle of a drought, and it's completely wiped out, and everyone there knows for sure that the God of Israel is God. And in this story, it's an amazing story. It's found in 1 Kings 18 if you ever want to read it. But this story concludes with 450 prophets of a false god being executed. And Elijah, he's there at the front of the line helping to kill these people. That's a picture of his power. In the next few verses, the queen, her name is Jezebel, hears what has happened, and she orders that Elijah be killed. And that's where we'll pick up the story today. 1 Kings 19, verse 3. Elijah was afraid. Man who just did these powerful acts was afraid, and he fled for his life. For whatever reason, he didn't know, even though he just called fire down from heaven, he didn't know if he would be safe. And he went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there, and then he went alone into the wilderness. And I'll just say that the place for you to go, if you are struggling with these kinds of issues, the place for you to go where they will become worse is into isolation. If you are struggling with your emotions, if you're struggling with your thoughts, if you find you are headed downhill, the worst place for you to go is into more isolation. That's why nearly every service here we talk to you about being in a small group. Find a way to connect with other people. Why? Because that's a place of health for you. So he went into the wilderness, and it says he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. He was really down. I think it's interesting because Elijah is not the only person in the Bible to pray to God to kill him. The Psalms are filled with requests like this to God. Just kill me. I'm at the end of my life. God, you don't care. You can't help me. So just end me right here. And sometimes I think, well, why is that here in the Bible? Why would we be told about this kind of despair? It was headed so in the wrong direction. Why are we told this about Elijah? You know why I think it is? It's because God can handle desperate prayers. God can handle our emotional desperation. God can handle it when we can't handle it anymore. God doesn't need for us to power through. God doesn't need for us to praise through. God doesn't need for us to smile our way through. God hears the prayer of honesty. He says, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. And then he says something that so many of us say and believe about ourselves, especially when we're down the furthest. I am no better than my ancestors. Very often when we are at a low place, the way that the enemy attacks us is to tell us that we're just like our father, or we're just like our mother, or we're never going to outlive or be different from the way that our family sinned. And that's kind of what Elijah's doing here. God, you've done great things through me, but I'm no better than my ancestors. Just kill me. They've already died. And then he lay down under the broom tree, but as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. I love it. I love it because the answer for Elijah here wasn't just pray more. The answer for Elijah here wasn't memorize another scripture or tell yourself what's true or just fight harder. The answer here was eat something you're really hungry and too tired. And he looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Now, I don't know if the angel brought that to him. I don't know if this is like heaven food or what. But what I think is so interesting is God didn't send someone to Elijah to tell him how wrong he was. God didn't send someone to Elijah to say, you know, you're mixed up. Can you think about why you're so mixed up? Tell me why you're sad today, Elijah. Instead, God prompted someone to bring him bread and water. And so he ate and he drank and he lay down again. And then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Get up and eat some more." You're still hungry. You still haven't resolved how you're depleted physically. You still haven't resolved the reason why you're voicing these prayers that I would kill you, Elijah. So just eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. Elijah needed to follow some common sense medical advice. Get some more rest. Get some more food. And so he got up and he drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave where he spent the night. You know, in this story, there are many things that we could pick out and we could focus on together. But I just want to focus on 3 applications in particular. And the first is this. We can choose to ruminate, that is, think on, focus on, dream about, fantasize about. We can ruminate on things that distort or strengthen our minds. And so you do have a role to play when it comes to your own mental health. For instance, if you are a person who's given to anger that you can't control, that is a mental health problem. There are likely some unresolved disappointments that you're dealing with. Maybe you're disappointed with how somebody else treated you. Maybe you have come to imagine that you're worthless because of what people said to you, and it's manifesting itself in anger today. I don't know what the source of that might be, but what I'm wanting you to understand is that the things that you focus on have the capacity, they have power to shape where your life goes. The things that you focus your mind on have the power to shape your soul. And so if you give yourself all the time, for example, to pornography, that is going to have an impact on you and on the way that you relate to sexuality. If you spend all your time focused on comparing yourself to others, or maybe like wishing that your life was better than it actually is, and you feel cheated by that, and you spend a lot of time in social media comparing yourself to other people, that's going to have an impact on your mental health. I'm saying to you that there are all kinds of ways, all kinds of things that you can focus on that will take you somewhere bad in terms of your trajectory. The Bible also points out to us that if we will focus on specific kinds of things, it will change our experience in life. Philippians chapter 4 says it like this: fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. You've got to train your mind to think on certain things, to think in a certain way. And he says this: keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing, then the God of peace will be with you. How is it that you can experience the God of peace? It's by setting your mind on certain things. It's by making specific choices about your behavior now. These things will make the atmosphere right for you to experience the God of peace. That's partly what the Bible's telling us. Now, that's not to say that is the whole answer to all mental illness. It's not. But I want you to hear this. When I focus on my hurts, I can become bitter. When I let comparison to others become the measure of my life, I will always lose. A second application from this story of Elijah is to confess and embrace human limitations. Confess and embrace human limitations. Last year, on August 1st, 2018, I found out that my wife, for the second time in her life, had breast cancer. And that was very disappointing to hear. They told us that there was one mass. A few weeks later, she was getting ready to have surgery in the early part of September. I took a trip to China. And on the very last day that I was as I was in China, Tracy learned that she didn't have one mass, she had 5 masses. She's okay today. Cancer's not there. Did a great scan recently. But when I heard this news, it was really troubling to me. It was so much worse than the first time that we found out she had cancer. And it was particularly disturbing to me because I was around on the other side of the world and she was facing that by herself, and I just wanted to be with her and just hold her and help her process through that. And at the same time, we were just a couple weeks away from launching our campus in West Lafayette. At the same time, we were just gearing up to finish the renovation of our community center. It's a big, big project. And that was going on. And the last day that I was in China, I remember I was in the Forbidden City near Tiananmen Square in Beijing. The Forbidden City is all these ancient buildings connected to the royal families of China. Was walking through and listening to our guide about what these places were and what happened there. It was fascinating, and suddenly I felt, it was not a conscious thought of mine, I had done my very best to put everything that was going on with my wife, as well as these big work projects, to the side. But I felt like my chest and my abdomen began to constrict. I could not breathe. I felt like I was going to die. What was it? I was having a panic attack. Why? Because the stresses in my life were more than I could handle, and just pushing it down or pushing it away or trying to power through, that wasn't the answer. What do I need to do? I need to confess and embrace human limitations. When I feel like I just don't have enough bandwidth to deal with what's going on in my life, I need to confess that to God, not just try and power through it. Listen to how Psalm says it. Psalm 139. I love these words. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Know my heart, how it's broken. Know my heart, how it's wicked. Know my heart, how it's lustful. Know my heart, how it's greedy. Know my heart, how it's disappointed. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. God wants to know your anxious thoughts. He doesn't just want to know your happy thoughts. He doesn't just want to know how great life is or how strong your faith is. He wants to know your anxious thoughts too. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Listen, The reason why confessing and embracing our human limitations is so important is because it is the path to becoming whole. If people in your life are telling you to see a doctor, it's time to go see a doctor. If people in your life are telling you you need to go to a counselor, it's time to go to a counselor. Every time that I meet with couples before they're going to get married for their premarital counseling, one thing I ask them to promise me is that if one of them ever says we need to see a marriage counselor, that they go do it right away. They say yes the first time. Why is that? Because if your spouse is telling you they're ready to go see a marriage counselor, that means things are so bad they are willing to take some drastic actions to fix them. Seeing a counselor is the cheapest and best way to fix it or to make it better. If the doctor suggests that you, for a limited time, take some medication, take it all, and match that up with going to see a counselor and talking about your problems. One of the ways that mental unhealth is reflected most clearly is in the health of our relationships. And so you've got to listen to what the people who are closest in your life are saying to you about you, because they're probably not wrong. And most of us, we find it easier to deny our weaknesses and limitations than to admit them, even though there's great strength in admitting them. We have here, through our community center, we've started to offer Celebrate Recovery again. And Celebrate Recovery is for hurts and hang-ups and habits of all kinds. You can learn more about that through the community center, through doing a search on Facebook about Celebrate Recovery in Lafayette. We also offer something called River of Hope. That is a group that's meant to support those that are going through grieving the loss of someone they love. But when I want you to hear this, understand this about your limitations and your weaknesses. If you're going through more than one significant stress in your life, and the significant stresses, I can think of 4. They all start with D. Significant stresses: death, divorce, disease, or debts. If you've got someone close to you who's died, if you're going through a divorce, or you've been through a divorce, if you're dealing with either your own disease or the disease of someone who's close to you, or you have money problems, you're going through more than one of those things at once, you probably are vulnerable to depression and anxiety. You've probably got some things that you need to talk about someone else with, someone who's skilled in listening, someone who's not just going to tell you to push it down and just power along. Because in your life, you've got limitations, you're weak, you're going to become desperate, and you're going to make some stupid decisions because of it. So confess your weaknesses and limitations. Embrace them. Last thing I want to mention here from the story, recognize that God can work through brokenness and weakness. A lot of times people say when they are going through problems like this that they can't serve anyone else or do anything for anyone else until they address their issues. I think it's false. I think it's absolutely not true. The Bible gives us a very different view of weaknesses. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12. These are the words of God to Paul. Paul, he's in the presence of God and he's praying and saying, I've got this thorn in my flesh, take it out. And then God says to him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me when I am weak. When I am weak, then I am strong. Don't allow your deficits to become the only measure of your potential, because God's power works best through human weakness. My limitations are not limitations for God. Your own mental or emotional health, it's a moving target that is in a process of evolving or devolving all the time. It goes up, it goes down, it becomes strong, it becomes weaker. And do you know what? God offers peace to those who trust Him, not to those who power through it. So often we can become impatient with ourselves or with others, and we just want to say, just get strong, just come on, just rub some dirt on it, keep going. Sometimes that's good advice, but sometimes it's really poor advice. I wrote these words down this morning. I was thinking about how I wanted to end this first message. I think they're words for you. If Jesus was overwhelmed, I can be overwhelmed. If Jesus wept, I can weep. If Jesus endured suffering He didn't deserve, I must not be surprised when I do.